They called her the cleaning lady for 3 months, making jokes behind her back and treating her like she was invisible. Then she walked into the executive conference room, pulled out her CEO identification badge, and fired half the management team on the spot. What they didn't know was that she had been watching everything, documenting every racist comment, every act of discrimination, every violation of company policy. And she had been planning this moment from day one. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Sterling Financial Group's headquarters in downtown Chicago. The 40-story glass tower stood as a monument to corporate success, its gleaming facade reflecting the bustling streets below. Inside, the lobby buzzed with the familiar rhythm of morning arrivals. Expensive shoes clicking against polished stone, designer briefcases swinging at the sides of hurried executives, and the constant hum of ambitious conversations about deals and quarterly projections. Jasmine Washington pushed through the employee entrance at exactly 6:30 a.m., just as she had done every morning for the past 3 months. She wore a simple navy blue uniform with maintenance staff embroidered on the pocket, her natural hair pulled back into a neat bun, and comfortable black shoes that wouldn't make noise on the pristine floors. In her hands, she carried a modest cleaning cart filled with supplies, moving with the kind of purposeful invisibility that comes from years of being overlooked. The security guard barely glanced up from his newspaper as she scanned her employee badge. The morning shift employees streamed past her without acknowledgement, their conversations continuing as if she weren't there. To them, she was just another service worker, part of the building's infrastructure rather than a person worth noticing. Jasmine had grown accustomed to this treatment, though it never stopped stinging. She watched as junior executives, some barely out of college, strutted through the lobby in their $1,000 suits, talking loudly about their weekend golf games and vacation plans to the Hamptons. These same people would later complain if a wastebasket wasn't emptied quickly enough, or if there was a single streak left on a conference room window. The Sterling Financial Group had built its reputation on being a progressive, forward-thinking investment firm. Their marketing materials featured diverse faces and inspiring quotes about equal opportunity and workplace inclusion. The company website proudly displayed awards for corporate responsibility and community engagement. But Jasmine knew the difference between public image and private reality. She had experienced it firsthand during her first week, when she overheard 2 senior analysts discussing a client presentation. One of them, a red-faced man named Bradley Morrison, had gestured dismissively in her direction, while complaining about these people not understanding the importance of maintaining a professional environment. His colleague had laughed, adding that, "At least they know their place." Neither man had bothered to lower their voices, secure in their assumption that their words carried no consequences. That same week, Jasmine witnessed a heated argument between a department head and one of the few black professionals in the company, a talented portfolio manager named Kenya Davis. The department head, Patricia Whitman, had accused Kenya of being aggressive and difficult to work with during a team meeting, despite Kenya having simply offered a well-researched alternative investment strategy. The incident had ended with Kenya being written up for unprofessional conduct, while Patricia received praise from upper management for maintaining team cohesion. As Jasmine rode the service elevator to the 15th floor, she reflected on the carefully constructed facade that Sterling Financial presented to the world. The company's diversity and inclusion officer, Michael Chen, regularly sent out newsletters celebrating Cultural Heritage Months and organizing voluntary bias training sessions that most employees skipped. Meanwhile, the executive leadership remained overwhelmingly white and male, with token appointments that looked good in annual reports but held little real power. The 15th floor housed the mid-level management offices, where Jasmine began her daily routine of emptying trash bins and sanitizing surfaces. She moved efficiently through the cubicles and private offices, her presence so commonplace that conversations continued around her as if she possessed no ears or capacity for understanding complex business discussions. It was in these moments of assumed invisibility that Jasmine gathered the most revealing information. She learned about upcoming layoffs that would disproportionately affect minority employees, discovered evidence of discriminatory hiring practices that violated federal law, and overheard discussions about manipulating performance reviews to justify predetermined termination decisions. One particularly disturbing conversation took place between two human resources directors, Jennifer Walsh and David Kim, who were planning to restructure the company's mentorship program. Their goal wasn't to improve opportunities for underrepresented employees, but rather to create the appearance of progress while ensuring that actual advancement remained limited to what Jennifer called culture fits, a thinly veiled reference to maintaining the existing power structure. Throughout these encounters, Jasmine maintained her composed demeanor, never showing a flicker of recognition or emotional response to the bigotry she witnessed. Her colleagues in the maintenance department sometimes commented on her unusual composure, noting that she seemed different from the other cleaning staff. Some attributed it to her educational background. She had mentioned attending college, though she remained vague about her specific degree or career history. Marcus Johnson, the lead custodian who had worked at Sterling Financial for over a decade, often expressed amazement at Jasmine's detailed knowledge of business terminology and her ability to quickly grasp complex corporate procedures. During their brief breaks in the supply closet, he would share stories about the various management changes he had witnessed over the years, describing a pattern of qualified minority candidates being passed over for promotions in favor of less experienced white employees. "This place has a way of making good people disappear," Marcus had confided to Jasmine during one of their conversations. "They'll find reasons to push out anyone who asks too many questions or challenges the way things have always been done. I've seen it happen too many times to count." Jasmine had listened carefully to these stories, filing away each detail and cross-referencing them with her own observations. She began to understand that Sterling Financial's problems went far deeper than isolated incidents of individual prejudice. The company had developed a systematic approach to maintaining discriminatory practices while avoiding legal consequences, using carefully worded policies and subjective evaluation criteria to justify decisions that consistently favored certain demographics over others. The more she learned, the more convinced she became that meaningful change would require dramatic action. Traditional approaches like filing complaints with human resources or seeking external regulatory intervention had proven ineffective against companies that possessed the resources to outlast individual challenges. Sterling Financial had successfully defended itself against previous discrimination lawsuits by wearing down plaintiffs through prolonged legal battles and settlement agreements that included strict non-disclosure clauses. As Jasmine completed her morning cleaning routine and prepared to move to the next floor, she caught her reflection in the polished surface of an elevator door. The woman looking back at her bore little resemblance to the executive she had been just 6 months earlier, before everything changed. The expensive business suits had been replaced by a maintenance uniform, the corner office had been traded for a supply closet, and the respect of colleagues had given way to casual dismissal and barely concealed contempt. But beneath the surface transformation, her determination remained unchanged. Every dismissive glance and condescending comment only strengthened her resolve to expose the truth about Sterling Financial Group and hold its leadership accountable for their actions. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, revealing the pristine hallway of the 16th floor where the real decision-makers worked. As Jasmine pushed her cart forward, she knew that each day brought her closer to the moment when she would reveal her true identity and begin the process of dismantling the corrupt system that had thrived in the shadows for too long. The morning was still young, and there was much work to be done. The higher floors of Sterling Financial told a different story than the polished lobby below. Here, behind closed doors and in supposedly private conversations, the real culture of the company revealed itself with brutal honesty. Jasmine had access to spaces that even mid-level employees never saw, cleaning executive washrooms, organizing private dining areas, and maintaining conference rooms where the most sensitive decisions were made. Seisama, her first major discovery, came during her second week. While cleaning the executive washroom on the 28th floor, she had entered quietly, as always, but stopped when she heard voices from the adjacent lounge area. Through the thin wall, she could clearly make out a conversation between Chief Financial Officer Robert Sterling III, the founder's grandson, and Head of Human Resources Jennifer Walsh. "The problem isn't finding qualified candidates," Robert was saying, his voice carrying the entitled tone of someone who had never questioned his place in the world. "It's finding the right kind of qualified candidates. We can't have the board thinking we're running some kind of charity operation." Jennifer's response was equally revealing. The latest diversity report shows we're still within acceptable legal parameters. As long as we maintain plausible deniability in our selection criteria, we can continue prioritizing cultural alignment over pure qualifications. They discussed specific employees by name, categorizing them into what they called keepers, maybes, and problems. The conversation revealed a deliberate strategy to gradually eliminate employees who didn't fit their unspoken demographic preferences, using performance improvement plans and restructuring initiatives as cover for discriminatory actions. Jasmine carefully noted every word, understanding that she was witnessing the kind of explicit discrimination that companies spent millions of dollars to keep hidden from public view. But this was just the beginning of what she would uncover. The 25th floor housed the investment strategy department, where portfolio managers made decisions that affected millions of dollars in client assets. During her evening cleaning shifts, Jasmine often found herself alone with computers that hadn't been properly logged out, revealing email conversations and internal memos that painted a disturbing picture of the company's internal operations. One evening, while emptying the trash in senior portfolio manager Thomas Crawford's office, she discovered a printed email chain discussing the, quote, Kenya Davis situation. The messages revealed a coordinated effort to document minor infractions and subjective performance issues that could be used to justify terminating Kenya's employment. The correspondence made it clear that Kenya's actual work performance was exemplary, but her willingness to challenge investment strategies and advocate for more diverse client portfolios had made her a target. The most damaging evidence came from Managing Director Lisa Hamilton, who had written, "We need to be strategic about this. Davis has allies in the compliance department, so we can't use obvious pretexts. Focus on soft skills, teamwork, cultural fit, leadership potential. These are subjective enough to justify whatever decision we want to make." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Jasmine photographed the documents with the small camera she had begun carrying, being careful to replace everything exactly as she had found it. She was building a comprehensive file of evidence, but she needed more than isolated incidents to prove systematic discrimination. Her breakthrough came 3 weeks later, during the company's quarterly leadership retreat. The executive team had gathered in the private conference room on the 30th floor for what they believed was a completely confidential strategy session. Jasmine had been assigned to maintain the catering setup and ensure the audiovisual equipment remained functional throughout the day-long meeting. The executives treated her presence as they would any piece of furniture, completely ignoring her while discussing the most sensitive aspects of their business operations. What she heard during those 8 hours fundamentally changed her understanding of how deeply embedded discriminatory practices had become in Sterling Financial's corporate structure. CEO Harrison Blackwood, a silver-haired man in his early 60s who projected an image of benevolent leadership in public settings, revealed his true attitudes during a discussion about competitor analysis. "Look at Goldman's latest hiring class," he said, gesturing dismissively at a presentation slide. "Half of them look like they belong in a university brochure rather than a trading floor. We're not running a social experiment here. We're running a business." The conversation that followed was even more explicit. Chief Operating Officer Amanda Richardson suggested implementing what she called enhanced screening protocols that would allow them to filter candidates based on criteria that couldn't be directly traced to protected characteristics. The proposed system would use algorithmic analysis of social media profiles, residential zip codes, and educational institutions to create preference rankings that appeared objective while actually reinforcing existing biases. "The beauty of this approach," Amanda explained to the group, "is that we can demonstrate statistical validity for our hiring decisions while maintaining complete control over outcomes. If anyone challenges our process, we can point to the data and claim we're simply selecting the most qualified candidates according to scientifically validated criteria." The executives spent considerable time refining this strategy, discussing how to implement it across different departments without creating documentation that could be used against them in potential legal proceedings. They spoke about minority employees and job candidates as problems to be managed, rather than people deserving equal opportunities, using coded language that revealed the depth of their prejudicial thinking. During a break in the formal session, Jasmine overheard smaller group conversations that were even more disturbing. Vice President of Client Relations Gregory Martinez bragged about his ability to steer minority-owned investment funds away from major contracts by raising technical objections that appeared legitimate but were actually pretextual. They never see it coming, he laughed. By the time they realize what's happening, we've already awarded the contract to someone more compatible with our long-term strategic vision. These revelations helped Jasmine understand why Sterling Financial had maintained such a homogeneous leadership structure despite decades of civil rights legislation and corporate diversity initiatives. The company had developed sophisticated methods for discrimination that were difficult to detect and nearly impossible to prove without insider access to decision-making processes. But the most shocking discovery came near the end of the retreat, when the executives began discussing individual employees who were scheduled for upcoming performance reviews. They had compiled what they called a management list, a ranking of employees based not on job performance, but on their perceived loyalty to existing power structures and their likelihood to challenge company policies. Kenya Davis was at the top of their termination priority list, followed by several other minority employees who had shown initiative or questioned established procedures. The executives had developed detailed strategies for documenting performance issues that would justify their predetermined decisions, including assigning these employees to projects with unrealistic deadlines and pairing them with managers who had been instructed to provide minimal support. The key is creating paper trails that tell the story we want them to tell, explained Human Resources Director Jennifer Walsh. Performance improvement plans, coaching documentation, peer feedback surveys. We can construct a narrative that justifies any personnel decision we want to make. As Jasmine listened to these conversations, she felt a mixture of rage and determination that crystallized her resolve to expose Sterling Financial's corrupt practices. But she also realized that traditional approaches like filing complaints or seeking media attention would be insufficient against an organization that had spent years perfecting its ability to conceal discriminatory actions behind layers of procedural complexity. The executives were preparing to leave when Harrison Blackwood made a comment that would prove to be prophetic. The important thing to remember, he told the group, is that we control the narrative. As long as we maintain our professional image and stick to our established procedures, no one can touch us. These people don't have the resources or connections to challenge an organization like Sterling Financial. As Jasmine cleaned up after the retreat, collecting coffee cups and straightening chairs while the executives departed for their weekend plans, she reflected on everything she had learned. The evidence she had gathered painted a clear picture of systematic discrimination, but she knew that exposing it would require perfect timing and flawless execution. The executives had made one critical error in their calculations. They had assumed that their actions would remain hidden, that their power structure was impregnable, and that their victims lacked the ability to fight back effectively. They had no idea that their most dangerous opponent had been sitting quietly in their midst, documenting their every move and preparing for the moment when justice would finally be served. The weekend stretched ahead, giving Jasmine time to organize her evidence and finalize her strategy. Monday would bring new challenges and new revelations, but she was ready for whatever came next. The invisible observer had seen enough, and soon it would be time to step out of the shadows. Harrison Blackwood's corner office occupied the entire northeast section of the 40th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a commanding view of Lake Michigan and the Chicago skyline. The space was designed to intimidate. Mahogany furniture imported from Italy, original oil paintings worth more than most people's annual salaries, and a handcrafted Persian rug that had been a gift from a Saudi oil minister. Every element reinforced the message that this was a man who controlled vast resources and wielded enormous influence. Jasmine entered the office during her evening cleaning rotation, moving quietly around the edges of the room while Harrison worked late at his desk. He was on a conference call with investors, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone accustomed to having his words treated as gospel. The conversation revealed layers of Sterling Financial's operations that even the quarterly retreat hadn't exposed. The regulatory environment is becoming increasingly challenging, Harrison was explaining to his unseen audience. But we've developed strategies that allow us to maintain our competitive advantages while staying within the technical boundaries of compliance requirements. What followed was a masterclass in corporate doublespeak. Harrison described their discriminatory hiring practices as cultural optimization initiatives, their systematic exclusion of minority-owned businesses as strategic vendor consolidation, and their manipulation of performance evaluations as enhanced accountability frameworks. Each euphemism was carefully crafted to sound legitimate while concealing illegal activities. The investors on the call were clearly satisfied with these explanations, asking detailed questions about implementation timelines and expected returns on investment. They spoke about diversity requirements as obstacles to be circumvented rather than legal mandates to be followed, treating federal anti-discrimination laws as mere suggestions that could be ignored with sufficient creativity. The key insight, Harrison continued, is understanding that perception management is more important than actual compliance. As long as we maintain the appearance of following best practices, we can operate with complete freedom. The regulatory agencies don't have the resources to conduct the kind of deep investigation that would be necessary to uncover our actual procedures. Jasmine found herself taking mental notes as Harrison outlined Sterling Financial's approach to what he called defensive diversity. The strategy involved hiring just enough minority employees to meet statistical requirements, while ensuring that these hires were placed in positions where they couldn't influence major decisions or advance to leadership roles. The company maintained detailed demographic data that allowed them to calculate the minimum level of diversity needed to avoid regulatory scrutiny. But Harrison's most revealing comments came during a side conversation with someone identified only as Senator Williams. The discussion made it clear that Sterling Financial had cultivated relationships with key political figures who could provide advance warning about upcoming investigations or regulatory changes. These connections gave the company significant advantages in staying ahead of enforcement efforts. The beauty of our current arrangement, Harrison explained to the senator, is that we can position ourselves as industry leaders in corporate responsibility while maintaining complete operational control. Your committee's recommendation for voluntary compliance guidelines was particularly helpful. It allows us to demonstrate good faith efforts without actually changing our fundamental practices. The conversation revealed a sophisticated network of influence that extended far beyond Sterling Financial's corporate boundaries. Harrison mentioned regular meetings with other industry executives who shared information about regulatory developments and coordinated responses to civil rights organizations. They had effectively created an informal cartel designed to resist meaningful diversity initiatives while maintaining public images as progressive employers. After the call ended, Harrison turned his attention to a stack of personnel files spread across his desk. Jasmine recognized several names from her observations around the office, including Kenya Davis and other minority employees who had been targeted for termination. Harrison was reviewing what appeared to be fabricated performance documentation, adding handwritten notes that would later be used to justify predetermined disciplinary actions. The files contained detailed psychological profiles of each targeted employee, analyzing their likely responses to various forms of pressure and identifying their potential sources of support within the organization. The level of calculation was breathtaking. Harrison and his team had spent months studying their victims, mapping their relationships, and developing personalized strategies for forcing them out of the company. One file contained a particularly disturbing analysis of Kenya Davis's financial situation, including information about her student loans, mortgage payments, and family obligations. The document outlined a strategy for creating maximum economic pressure by timing her termination to coincide with major personal expenses, making it less likely that she would have the resources to pursue legal action against the company. Harrison made a phone call to Chief Operating Officer Amanda Richardson, discussing the implementation timeline for what they called Project Streamline, their coded reference to the mass termination of targeted employees. The conversation revealed that similar operations were being coordinated across Sterling Financial's offices in New York, Los Angeles, and Atlanta, suggesting that the Chicago office was part of a much larger pattern of discriminatory practices. The legal department has confirmed that our documentation is bulletproof, Harrison told Amanda. Even if some of these people try to file complaints, we have enough evidence of performance issues to justify our decisions. The key is maintaining consistency in our messaging and ensuring that all managers stick to the approved talking points. The call continued with detailed discussions about media management and crisis communication strategies. Sterling Financial had retained a prominent public relations firm that specialized in helping corporations navigate discrimination scandals, and they had developed comprehensive plans for responding to any negative publicity that might result from their actions. Remember, Harrison emphasized, we're not just protecting the company's reputation, we're protecting an entire industry standard. If we allow these challenges to succeed, it sets a precedent that could affect every major financial institution in the country. The stakes are much higher than just our quarterly profits. As Jasmine continued her cleaning routine, she observed Harrison reviewing what appeared to be a master strategy document titled Sustainable Competitive Advantages in Human Capital Management. The euphemistic language couldn't disguise the document's true purpose. It was a comprehensive guide to maintaining discriminatory practices while avoiding legal consequences. The document contained detailed case studies of other companies that had successfully defended against discrimination lawsuits, analyzing their strategies and identifying best practices that could be adapted to Sterling Financial's specific circumstances. It included recommendations for lobbying efforts, political contributions, and strategic partnerships with organizations that appeared to support diversity while actually working to undermine meaningful change. Harrison's personal assistant, Victoria Chen, entered the office with additional files and a secure tablet containing encrypted communications. The conversation that followed revealed another dimension of Sterling Financial's operations. They were actively working to undermine competitors who had implemented genuine diversity initiatives, using their industry connections to spread negative information about companies that refused to participate in their discriminatory practices. The Morrison Group's new diversity program is starting to affect their client relationships, Victoria reported. Our contacts at several pension funds have expressed concerns about their experimental approach to portfolio management. I think we can accelerate their client losses if we coordinate with the other firms. Harrison approved a plan to systematically target the Morrison Group's business relationships, using coded communications to suggest that their diverse hiring practices indicated a lack of commitment to traditional investment strategies. The strategy was designed to create financial pressure that would force their competitors to abandon diversity initiatives or face significant revenue losses. The evening concluded with Harrison reviewing surveillance reports from private investigators who had been hired to monitor former Sterling Financial employees who had filed discrimination complaints. The company was tracking these individuals' job searches, personal finances, and legal activities, looking for opportunities to undermine their credibility or create additional pressure to abandon their cases. As Harrison finally prepared to leave for the night, he made one final phone call to someone he addressed only as Judge Morrison. The conversation was brief but revealing. Harrison was providing updates on Sterling Financial's legal strategies to someone who appeared to be positioned to influence judicial proceedings. The timing looks favorable for our motion to dismiss, Harrison reported. Our legal team believes we can get the entire class action case thrown out on procedural grounds before it reaches discovery. Your insights about the federal court's recent precedents have been invaluable in shaping our approach. After Harrison departed, Jasmine remained in the office for an additional 30 minutes, carefully photographing documents and copying files that revealed the full scope of Sterling Financial's discriminatory operations. The evidence she gathered that evening would prove to be some of the most damaging in her growing collection, but she knew that even this level of documentation might not be sufficient to overcome the company's vast resources and political connections. The antagonist's world was more sophisticated and more dangerous than she had initially realized. But it was also more vulnerable than Harrison Blackwood imagined, because he had made the fatal error of underestimating his opposition. Soon, his carefully constructed empire of discrimination would face its greatest challenge from the one person he had never bothered to notice. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in November, during what should have been a routine day of cleaning the 22nd floor. Jasmine was emptying wastebaskets in the compliance department when she heard shouting coming from the director's office. Through the partially open door, she could see Kenya Davis standing across from Director Michael Thompson, her hands trembling as she held a termination letter. "This is retaliation, and you know it," Kenya was saying, her voice steady despite the obvious emotional strain. "Every performance metric shows that my portfolio outperformed department averages by 12% this quarter. My client satisfaction scores are the highest in the division. There is no legitimate business reason for this decision." Thompson's response was delivered with the cool precision of someone who had rehearsed these conversations many times before. "Your technical performance has never been in question, Kenya. However, leadership requires more than just numbers. The feedback from your colleagues indicates ongoing challenges with collaboration and cultural integration. We've provided multiple opportunities for improvement, but the consensus is that you're not the right fit for our team dynamic." Jasmine watched Kenya's face as the carefully constructed lies washed over her. This was a woman who had graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern's business school, who had brought in over $40 million in new client assets during her 3 years at Sterling Financial, who had mentored junior employees and volunteered for every diversity initiative the company had ever announced. Now she was being dismissed with corporate doublespeak that everyone in the room knew was fabricated. "I want to see the specific feedback reports," Kenya demanded. "I want to review the collaboration metrics you're referencing. I want documentation of these alleged improvement opportunities that were supposedly provided." Thompson's smile was practiced and empty. "I'm afraid those materials contain confidential peer evaluations that we can't share. However, HR has prepared a comprehensive transition package that includes extended health benefits and career placement services. We're committed to making this process as smooth as possible for everyone involved." The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, with Thompson deflecting every reasonable question and Kenya growing increasingly frustrated with the obvious stonewalling. Jasmine found herself gripping her cleaning supplies tighter as she listened to the systematic destruction of a brilliant woman's career, all delivered with the kind of bureaucratic politeness that made effective resistance nearly impossible. When Kenya finally left the office, her professional composure intact but her eyes betraying the devastation she felt, Jasmine made a decision that would change everything. She couldn't stand by and watch anymore. She couldn't continue pretending that documenting these injustices was sufficient, when good people were being destroyed by a system designed to crush anyone who didn't fit the predetermined mold. That evening, Jasmine returned to her small apartment and spread all of her evidence across the kitchen table. Photographs of documents, audio recordings from her discreet recording device, detailed notes from conversations she had overheard. The collection represented 3 months of meticulous documentation that painted a comprehensive picture of Sterling Financial's discriminatory practices. But as she reviewed the materials, Jasmine realized that evidence alone wouldn't be enough to create meaningful change. The company had too many resources, too many connections, and too much experience in defeating legal challenges. Traditional approaches like filing complaints with regulatory agencies or seeking media attention would likely result in prolonged battles that Sterling Financial was well equipped to win through attrition. She thought about the other employees who had been targeted. Marcus Rodriguez from the accounting department, who had been placed on an impossible performance improvement plan after questioning discrepancies in executive expense reports. Aisha Williams from business development, who had been excluded from major client meetings after suggesting more inclusive marketing strategies. David Chang from research analysis, who had been transferred to a dead-end position after his report on industry discrimination practices had been buried by management. Each of these individuals had tried to work within the system, following proper procedures and trusting that their merit would eventually be recognized. Instead, they had been systematically marginalized and pushed toward the exits, their contributions minimized, and their careers derailed by people who saw diversity as a threat to their own power. Jasmine picked up her phone and stared at it for a long moment, considering her options. She could call Kenya and offer to serve as a witness in any legal action she might pursue. She could contact investigative journalists who specialized in corporate corruption stories. She could reach out to civil rights organizations that had the expertise to navigate complex discrimination cases. But all of these approaches shared the same fundamental weakness. They positioned her as a victim or whistleblower, dependent on others to validate her experiences and take action on her behalf. They required her to convince skeptical outsiders that Sterling Financial's carefully constructed facade concealed systematic wrongdoing, a task that had proven nearly impossible for previous complainants. As she sat in her kitchen, surrounded by evidence of corruption and thinking about Kenya's dignified exit from the compliance office, Jasmine made a different choice. She wouldn't be a victim, and she wouldn't be a whistleblower. She would be something that Sterling Financial's executives had never encountered and weren't prepared to handle. She opened her laptop and began researching Harrison Blackwood's background, looking for information that went beyond the sanitized corporate biography available on Sterling Financial's website. What she found was revealing Blackwood had been involved in 3 previous discrimination lawsuits during his career, all of which had been settled out of court with sealed agreements. He had a pattern of creating hostile work environments and then using his resources to silence his victims. But Blackwood had made his career in an era when corporate accountability was limited and media scrutiny was easier to manage. The digital age had created new vulnerabilities for people who thought they could operate in shadows indefinitely. Social media had democratized information distribution, and younger consumers increasingly made business decisions based on corporate social responsibility records. Jasmine spent the next several hours developing a comprehensive strategy that would leverage Sterling Financial's dependence on public perception and client confidence. The company's business model relied heavily on institutional investors and pension funds that were becoming increasingly sensitive to environmental, social, and governance factors. A well-documented discrimination scandal could trigger client withdrawals that would create immediate financial consequences. She began drafting a detailed timeline of events, organizing her evidence into categories that would be easily understood by journalists, regulators, and potential plaintiffs in class action lawsuits. But instead of planning to release this information through traditional channels, she decided to take a more direct approach. The next morning, Jasmine arrived at Sterling Financial with a new sense of purpose. She went through her usual cleaning routine, but now every conversation she overheard and every document she encountered was being evaluated for its potential strategic value. She was no longer just documenting wrongdoing. She was preparing for war. During her lunch break, she made a series of phone calls to former Sterling Financial employees who had been forced out under questionable circumstances. Many of them were reluctant to discuss their experiences, having signed non-disclosure agreements as part of their severance packages. But Jasmine wasn't asking them to violate their agreements. She was offering them something they had never expected to receive. "What if I told you that there might be a way to hold Sterling Financial accountable without you having to take any risks?" she asked each person. "What if someone else was willing to take the lead and bear the consequences?" The responses were cautious but interested. These were people who had been forced to choose between their principles and their livelihoods, who had been made to feel powerless against a system that seemed designed to protect wrongdoers. The possibility of justice being served by someone else was almost too good to believe. As the week progressed, Jasmine began reaching out to current employees who were at risk of termination, offering them information and support without revealing her true identity or intentions. She started with Kenya Davis, who was still technically employed but knew her days were numbered. "There are people who are willing to fight back," Jasmine told Kenya during a carefully arranged meeting in a coffee shop several blocks from Sterling Financial. "People who have access to information that could change everything. But it's going to require patience and trust." Kenya studied Jasmine's face, clearly trying to understand how a maintenance worker had such detailed knowledge of the company's internal operations. "Who are you really?" she asked finally. Jasmine smiled for the first time in months. "Someone who's tired of watching good people get destroyed by bad people, someone who's in a position to do something about it." The breaking point had been reached, and there was no going back. The invisible observer was ready to step into the light. The transformation had begun 6 months earlier, in the executive conference room of Meridian Capital Management in downtown Detroit. Jasmine Washington had been sitting at the head of a gleaming mahogany table, surrounded by the board of directors who had just unanimously approved her proposal to acquire Sterling Financial Group. At 34, she was the youngest CEO in Meridian's history, having built her reputation through a series of strategic acquisitions that had transformed struggling financial firms into profitable, ethically managed enterprises. "The Sterling acquisition represents more than just a business opportunity," Jasmine had explained to the board that day. "It's a chance to demonstrate that principled leadership can coexist with exceptional financial performance. Their toxic culture has created significant operational inefficiencies that we can correct while simultaneously improving workplace conditions for their employees." Board Chairman William Foster, a veteran of 40 years in corporate finance, had leaned forward with interest. "What's your timeline for integration, Jasmine?" "Sterling's management team has a reputation for resistance to outside influence." Jasmine's smile had been enigmatic. "I believe the key to successful integration is understanding the existing culture before attempting to change it. I plan to spend several months conducting what you might call deep reconnaissance, learning how Sterling really operates beneath its public facade." The board had approved her unconventional approach, trusting in the track record that had made Jasmine one of the most sought-after turnaround specialists in the industry. Her previous successes at Pinnacle Investment Services and Harmony Financial Group had demonstrated her ability to identify and eliminate discriminatory practices, while dramatically improving both employee satisfaction and profitability. But none of the board members had understood the full scope of what Jasmine was planning. They assumed she would conduct her research through traditional executive channels, management interviews, financial audits, consultant reports. They had no idea she intended to infiltrate Sterling Financial at the ground level, experiencing firsthand the daily reality of employees who existed far below the executive radar. The infiltration had required months of careful preparation. Jasmine had worked with a private security firm to establish a completely new identity, complete with background history, employment records, and personal references that would withstand routine verification. She had studied the mannerisms and speech patterns of service workers, practiced moving invisibly through corporate environments, and learned the technical skills necessary to perform maintenance duties convincingly. Most challenging had been the psychological preparation required to endure 3 months of deliberate invisibility and casual discrimination. Jasmine was accustomed to commanding respect in boardrooms, making decisions that affected thousands of employees, and being recognized as a leader in her field. Subjecting herself to the daily humiliations experienced by Sterling Financial's service staff required a level of commitment that even her closest advisors had questioned. "You're risking everything for information you could probably obtain through conventional due diligence," her legal counsel Patricia Martinez had warned during one of their final planning sessions. "If your real identity is discovered before you're ready to reveal it, the backlash could destroy both your reputation and Meridian's acquisition plans." But Jasmine had been convinced that conventional approaches would be insufficient to uncover the depth of Sterling Financial's problems. Previous discrimination lawsuits had been defeated through legal maneuvering and settlements that concealed rather than corrected underlying issues. She needed evidence that was so comprehensive and damning that it couldn't be dismissed or buried through procedural challenges. The plan had required coordination with a small team of trusted allies who could provide support without compromising her cover. Dr. Angela Thompson, a forensic accountant who had worked with Jasmine on previous acquisitions, had been monitoring Sterling Financial's financial records from the outside, looking for patterns that correlated with the discrimination Jasmine was documenting internally. "The numbers tell a story that matches your observations," Angela had reported during one of their weekly encrypted video calls. "Their human capital expenditures show systematic underinvestment in diversity training, employee development programs, and harassment prevention initiatives. Meanwhile, they've dramatically increased spending on legal defense funds and public relations consultants." Technology specialist Raymond Kim had been providing Jasmine with sophisticated surveillance equipment disguised as standard cleaning supplies. Miniature cameras hidden in spray bottles, audio recording devices concealed in vacuum cleaners, and encrypted communication tools that appeared to be ordinary maintenance equipment had allowed her to gather evidence without detection. "The beauty of this setup," Raymond had explained, "is that even if someone discovers the equipment, they'll assume it belongs to corporate security or loss prevention. No one would suspect that the cleaning lady is conducting her own intelligence operation." The most crucial member of Jasmine's support team had been Dr. Michael Chen, an organizational psychologist who specialized in workplace culture analysis. He had been helping her interpret the behavioral patterns she observed, identifying the subtle signs of systematic discrimination that might not be obvious to someone without advanced training in social dynamics. "What you're describing goes beyond individual bias," Michael had told her after reviewing her weekly reports. "This is institutional discrimination that has been systematized and normalized over many years." The fact that they're comfortable discussing these practices openly in front of service staff suggests they view these employees as fundamentally non-threatening, which gives you an enormous strategic advantage. As the weeks had passed, Jasmine's evidence collection had become increasingly sophisticated. She had identified key power brokers within Sterling Financial's hierarchy, mapped informal communication networks that operated outside official channels, and documented decision-making processes that revealed the true priorities driving company policies. Her breakthrough had come when she gained access to Harrison Blackwood's private email server during a late-night cleaning session in his office. Using specialized software provided by Raymond Kim, she had been able to download months of archived communications that revealed Sterling Financial's connections to a network of similarly discriminatory firms across the financial services industry. The emails had contained explicit discussions of strategies for avoiding regulatory oversight, detailed analyses of legal precedents that could be exploited to defeat discrimination claims, and coordination with political allies who could influence enforcement priorities. Most damning had been a series of messages discussing what Blackwood called succession planning, a systematic effort to ensure that Sterling Financial's discriminatory culture would survive any potential leadership changes. "The key insight," Blackwood had written to his inner circle, "is that our competitive advantages aren't based on superior investment strategies or innovative financial products. They're based on our ability to maintain workforce consistency and cultural coherence While our competitors struggle with diversity requirements, we need to protect this advantage at all costs. These communications had provided Jasmine with the final pieces of evidence she needed to demonstrate that Sterling Financial's discrimination wasn't the result of isolated bad actors or unconscious bias. It was a deliberate business strategy that had been carefully planned and systematically implemented over many years. But evidence alone wouldn't be sufficient to create the dramatic change that Jasmine envisioned. She needed to time her revelation perfectly, ensuring maximum impact while minimizing Sterling Financial's ability to mount an effective defense. The quarterly board meeting scheduled for the following week would provide the ideal opportunity, a gathering of all key decision-makers in a setting where immediate action could be taken. Jasmine had spent her final week of infiltration making detailed preparations for the confrontation. She had arranged for simultaneous media releases that would ensure widespread coverage of Sterling Financial's discriminatory practices. She had coordinated with regulatory agencies that were prepared to launch investigations based on her evidence. Most importantly, she had secured commitments from Meridian Capital's board to proceed with immediate leadership changes once the acquisition was complete. The night before the board meeting, Jasmine had sat in her apartment, looking through the window at Sterling Financial's illuminated tower. Tomorrow she would walk into that building for the last time as an invisible observer. When she left, she would either have successfully exposed one of the financial industry's most sophisticated discrimination operations, or she would have destroyed her own career in the attempt. She had picked up her phone and called her mentor, former Meridian CEO Elizabeth Warren, who had guided her through every major challenge in her career. "Are you ready for this?" Elizabeth had asked simply. Jasmine had looked at her reflection in the dark window, seeing not the maintenance worker she had pretended to be, but the executive she had always been. "I was born ready," she had replied. The secret power was about to be revealed, and Sterling Financial would never be the same. The Sterling Financial boardroom had never hosted a meeting quite like this one. The quarterly board session was scheduled to begin at 9 a.m. sharp, with 14 board members, the complete executive leadership team, and selected department heads filling the elegant conference room on the 40th floor. Outside, the floor-to-ceiling windows Lake Michigan stretched endlessly toward the horizon, while inside, the assembled executives projected their usual confidence about another successful quarter of profits and growth. Harrison Blackwood sat at the head of the polished table, reviewing his presentation notes one final time. The agenda was routine financial performance updates, regulatory compliance reports, and strategic planning discussions. He had no reason to expect anything other than the unanimous approval and congratulations that had characterized every board meeting during his 8-year tenure as CEO. At exactly 8:55 a.m., Jasmine entered the boardroom pushing her familiar cleaning cart. She moved with the same quiet efficiency that had made her invisible for 3 months, checking water pitchers and ensuring that the audio-visual equipment was functioning properly. Several executives glanced at her briefly before returning to their conversations, their minds already focused on the business matters they would soon be discussing. Board Chairman Robert Sterling III was in the middle of describing his recent golf game with a prominent client when Jasmine quietly positioned herself near the presentation screen at the front of the room. She waited until Harrison Blackwood called the meeting to order, and the room fell silent. "Good morning, everyone," Harrison began, his voice carrying its usual authority. "I'm pleased to report that Sterling Financial has exceeded our performance targets for the 3rd consecutive quarter, with particularly strong results in our institutional investment division." "Excuse me," Jasmine interrupted softly. The room turned toward her with varying degrees of surprise and annoyance. Harrison's expression shifted from confusion to irritation as he processed the unprecedented interruption. "I'm sorry, but we're in the middle of an important meeting," he said tersely. "Whatever maintenance issues you need to address can wait until we're finished." Jasmine reached into her cart and withdrew a leather portfolio that none of them had ever seen before. "Actually, Mr. Blackwood, I think you'll find that what I have to discuss is directly relevant to your presentation." She opened the portfolio and removed a Sterling Financial identification badge, not the basic employee access card that they had seen her use for 3 months, but an executive-level badge with her photograph and a title that made several board members lean forward in their chairs. "My name is Jasmine Washington," she said, her voice now carrying a completely different tone of authority. "I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Meridian Capital Management, and as of this morning I'm also the new majority owner of Sterling Financial Group." The silence that followed was absolute. Harrison Blackwood's face went through a series of rapid color changes as he processed what he was hearing. Chief Operating Officer Amanda Richardson dropped her pen, the small sound echoing in the stunned quiet. Board members looked between Jasmine and each other, trying to understand how the woman they had dismissed as invisible cleaning staff was now claiming to control their company. "Ma'am, this is ridiculous," Harrison finally managed, his voice rising. "Security needs to remove this person immediately. I don't know what kind of scam you're running, but—" "The acquisition was completed at 8:30 this morning," Jasmine continued calmly, placing a legal document on the table. "Meridian Capital purchased a controlling stake through a series of strategic investments that have been in development for the past 6 months. The transaction was approved by the Federal Trade Commission last Friday, and all regulatory requirements have been satisfied." Board Chairman Sterling reached for the document with trembling hands, his eyes scanning the official letterhead and legal signatures that confirmed Jasmine's claims. As the reality of the situation began to sink in, his face took on the grayish pallor of someone experiencing a fundamental shift in his understanding of the world. "But sure, you've been cleaning our offices," whispered Human Resources Director Jennifer Walsh, as if saying the words aloud might somehow make the situation make sense. "I've been conducting due diligence," Jasmine corrected. "For 3 months, I've had the opportunity to observe Sterling Financial's actual operations rather than the sanitized version typically presented to potential investors. What I discovered was far worse than anything indicated in your public filings or regulatory submissions." She reached into her portfolio again and withdrew a thick folder containing photocopied documents, printed emails, and detailed surveillance photographs. "This contains comprehensive evidence of systematic discrimination, fraud, and violation of federal employment laws. I have documentation of deliberately falsified performance reviews, evidence of coordinated efforts to exclude minority-owned businesses from contracting opportunities, and recordings of executive conversations discussing strategies for circumventing civil rights legislation." Harrison Blackwood stood up abruptly, his chair rolling backward. "This is entrapment! You can't use evidence obtained through deception and infiltration. Any lawyer will tell you that." "Actually," Jasmine interrupted, "I can. I obtained this evidence as a lawful owner of the company, conducting legitimate business oversight. The fact that your management team failed to recognize my authority doesn't invalidate my right to investigate operational practices." She turned to address the board members directly, her voice taking on the commanding presence that had made her successful in corporate boardrooms across the country. "Ladies and gentlemen, you have a choice to make. You can continue supporting a leadership team that has exposed this company to massive legal liability while creating a toxic workplace culture, or you can authorize immediate corrective action that protects both Sterling Financial's reputation and your own personal exposure to shareholder lawsuits." Chief Financial Officer Thomas Crawford found his voice first. "Even if everything you're claiming is true, you can't just walk in here and fire people without following proper procedures. We have employment contracts, severance requirements." "Mr. Crawford," Jasmine replied with a slight smile, "I'm not firing anyone for cause related to their individual performance. I'm implementing immediate organizational restructuring based on documented patterns of illegal behavior that have created an untenable business environment. Your employment contracts include provisions for termination in cases of gross misconduct that jeopardizes the company's legal standing." She walked to the presentation screen and connected her laptop, displaying the first page of what was clearly an extensive slide presentation. "I'm going to share with you a small sample of the evidence I've gathered, so you can understand the magnitude of the legal exposure that Sterling Financial currently faces." The first slide contained a photograph of Harrison Blackwood's handwritten notes about managing the diversity problem, followed by screenshots of emails discussing strategies for avoiding regulatory oversight. As slide after slide revealed increasingly damning evidence, the boardroom atmosphere grew thick with tension and barely suppressed panic. "This is a witch hunt," Amanda Richardson declared, but her voice lacked conviction. "You're taking conversations out of context and misrepresenting normal business discussions." Jasmine clicked to a slide containing a verbatim transcript of Richardson's own voice discussing enhanced screening protocols to exclude minority candidates. The audio quality was crystal clear, and Richardson's words were followed by enthusiastic agreement from other executives whose voices were equally recognizable. "I have over 40 hours of similar recordings," Jasmine announced. "I have financial documents showing discriminatory allocation of resources, promotion records that demonstrate systematic bias, and communications with political allies discussing strategies for avoiding accountability." This isn't a misunderstanding or misinterpretation. This is a comprehensive pattern of illegal behavior that has been deliberately concealed from regulatory oversight. Board member Catherine Mills, who had served on Sterling Financial's board for 12 years, finally spoke. "What are you proposing we do about this situation?" "I'm proposing immediate leadership changes that will allow Sterling Financial to rebuild its culture while minimizing legal exposure," Jasmine replied. "Mr. Blackwood, Ms. Richardson, Mr. Crawford, Ms. Walsh, and 6 other members of the executive team will be terminated effective immediately. I'll be assuming operational control while implementing comprehensive reforms that address the systemic issues I've documented." Harrison Blackwood's face had moved through shock and anger to a kind of desperate calculation. "You can't prove that any of our actions were motivated by discriminatory intent. Business decisions are based on legitimate performance criteria and—" "Mr. Blackwood," Jasmine interrupted, her voice carrying the finality of a judge delivering a verdict, "your own emails contain explicit discussions of racial and gender-based decision-making. You have documented conversations about creating the appearance of compliance while maintaining discriminatory practices. You have written evidence of coordination with other executives to suppress civil rights enforcement." She clicked to a final slide showing a photograph of Blackwood's private email discussing succession planning to preserve Sterling Financial's discriminatory culture. "This isn't about proving intent. Intent has been explicitly documented in your own words." The boardroom fell silent again as the magnitude of their situation became clear. Board Chairman Sterling looked around the table at his colleagues, seeing his own mixture of shock and fear reflected in their faces. "All in favor of accepting Ms. Washington's leadership transition plan?" he asked quietly. 11 hands rose immediately, 2 abstained, none voted against. Harrison Blackwood looked around the room at people who had supported him for years, now abandoning him without hesitation in the face of undeniable evidence. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "Yes, Mr. Blackwood," Jasmine replied, already moving toward the chair he was vacating. "It is." The immediate aftermath of Harrison Blackwood's removal created a power vacuum that Jasmine moved quickly to fill. Within hours of the boardroom confrontation, she had established a crisis management center in the executive conference room, coordinating with legal teams, regulatory agencies, and media representatives, while simultaneously beginning the complex process of organizational reconstruction. Her first priority was protecting the employees who had been targeted for termination under the previous regime. Kenya Davis was summoned to the 40th floor, where she found herself face-to-face with the woman who had been quietly emptying her wastebaskets for 3 months. "I know this must be incredibly disorienting," Jasmine said, gesturing for Kenya to sit in one of the leather chairs that surrounded the mahogany conference table. "But I want you to understand that everything you experienced here was documented and will be addressed." Kenya studied Jasmine's face, still struggling to reconcile the maintenance worker she had known with the corporate executive sitting across from her. "You were watching all of us. You saw what they were doing and didn't intervene." "I needed comprehensive evidence before I could act," Jasmine replied honestly. "Individual interventions would have alerted them to change their tactics without addressing the underlying system. The discrimination you experienced was part of a coordinated strategy that required a coordinated response." The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the conference room door. Marcus Johnson, the lead custodian who had befriended Jasmine during her infiltration, entered with obvious uncertainty about whether he was supposed to be in the executive suite. "Ms. Washington," he said hesitantly, "I heard there were some big changes happening, and I wanted to make sure our department wasn't going to be affected by the reorganization." Jasmine stood and extended her hand to Marcus with genuine warmth. "Marcus, I owe you an apology for not being completely honest about who I was. But I also want you to know that your insights about this company's culture were invaluable in helping me understand what needed to be changed." Over the next several hours, Jasmine conducted individual meetings with dozens of employees, explaining the situation and outlining her plans for reforming Sterling Financial's workplace culture. Many of the conversations were emotional, as people realized that their daily experiences of discrimination and marginalization had been witnessed and validated by someone in a position to create meaningful change. David Chang from the research department broke down crying when Jasmine showed him copies of the emails discussing his transfer to a dead-end position. "I thought I was going crazy," he admitted. "Everyone kept telling me it was a promotion, but I knew they were trying to push me out." "You weren't going crazy," Jasmine assured him. "You were experiencing gaslighting on an institutional level. That's going to end, starting today." Meanwhile, the legal implications of Jasmine's evidence were creating shockwaves throughout the financial services industry. The Department of Justice had opened a federal investigation into Sterling Financial's practices, while the Securities and Exchange Commission was reviewing whether the company's discriminatory hiring practices constituted fraud against investors who had been misled about the firm's operational integrity. Patricia Martinez, Jasmine's legal counsel, arrived from Detroit with a team of attorneys who began the complex process of reviewing 3 months' worth of surveillance evidence. The material was so extensive that it required specialized software to catalog and cross-reference the various forms of discrimination that had been documented. "This is the most comprehensive workplace surveillance operation I've ever seen," Patricia told Jasmine during a late-night strategy session. "The federal prosecutors are saying they've never had access to this level of internal evidence in a discrimination case. Harrison Blackwood's own words are going to make conviction almost automatic." But the legal proceedings were only one aspect of the transformation that Jasmine was implementing. She had brought in Dr. Angela Thompson, the forensic accountant who had been monitoring Sterling Financial's finances during her infiltration, to conduct a complete audit of the company's resource allocation and compensation practices. "The financial discrimination is even worse than we suspected," Angela reported to the board during an emergency session. "They've been systematically underpaying minority employees while providing above-market compensation to white male executives. The disparity is so significant that it constitutes wage theft on a massive scale." The audit revealed that Sterling Financial had saved approximately $12 million over 5 years through discriminatory compensation practices, money that was immediately allocated to a victim compensation fund that would provide back pay and damages to affected employees. Dr. Michael Chen, the organizational psychologist who had helped Jasmine interpret her observations, was brought in to design a comprehensive culture change program that would address the deep-seated attitudes and beliefs that had made Sterling Financial's discrimination possible. "The challenge isn't just changing policies," Michael explained to the senior management team that Jasmine was assembling from internal promotions and external hires. "It's changing the fundamental assumptions that people make about merit, qualification, and cultural fit. These biases are often unconscious, but they create measurable patterns of discriminatory behavior." The culture change program included mandatory bias training for all employees, restructured performance evaluation systems that relied on objective metrics rather than subjective assessments, and transparent promotion processes that eliminated the informal networks that had previously controlled advancement opportunities. But perhaps the most dramatic change was Jasmine's decision to make Sterling Financial's discrimination evidence publicly available through a dedicated website that documented exactly how systematic workplace bias operated in practice. The site included anonymized excerpts from executive conversations, statistical analyses of hiring and promotion patterns, and detailed explanations of the strategies that had been used to avoid regulatory oversight. "We're not just fixing our own problems," Jasmine announced during a company-wide meeting. "We're providing a roadmap that other organizations can use to identify and eliminate similar practices. Discrimination thrives in secrecy, so we're choosing transparency." The response from Sterling Financial's clients was swift and decisive. Several major pension funds announced that they were reviewing their relationships with the firm, while others issued statements praising Jasmine's leadership and expressing confidence in the company's new direction. The net result was actually positive. Sterling Financial gained more new clients than it lost, as institutional investors increasingly valued companies with demonstrated commitments to ethical practices. Harrison Blackwood's attempts to challenge his termination quickly collapsed when federal prosecutors filed criminal charges related to conspiracy to violate civil rights laws. His carefully constructed network of industry allies abandoned him as quickly as Sterling Financial's board had, unwilling to risk association with someone who had become a symbol of corporate discrimination. The broader financial services industry was forced to confront the reality that Sterling Financial's practices were not unique. Jasmine's evidence had revealed connections to discriminatory networks that extended across multiple firms, prompting regulatory investigations and internal reviews throughout the sector. 6 months after the boardroom confrontation, Jasmine stood before a congressional committee that was investigating discrimination in financial services. Her testimony, supported by the comprehensive evidence she had gathered, led to new federal legislation that strengthened enforcement mechanisms and increased penalties for companies that engaged in systematic discrimination. The Sterling Financial case demonstrates that discrimination is not just a moral failure, it's a business failure, she told the committee. Companies that exclude talented people based on irrelevant characteristics are operating inefficiently and creating unnecessary risks for their stakeholders. The transformation of Sterling Financial became a case study taught in business schools across the country, demonstrating how leadership, courage, and strategic thinking could overcome even the most entrenched discriminatory practices. Kenya Davis, who had been promoted to Senior Vice President of Investment Strategy, frequently spoke at industry conferences about her experience and the importance of creating genuine opportunities for advancement. Marcus Johnson, the custodian who had shared his insights about Sterling Financial's culture during Jasmine's infiltration, was promoted to Facilities Management Director and became an advocate for treating all employees with dignity and respect regardless of their job responsibilities. The company's financial performance improved dramatically under Jasmine's leadership, as the elimination of discriminatory practices allowed Sterling Financial to recruit and retain top talent from previously excluded communities. The firm's investment strategies became more innovative and successful as diverse perspectives were finally welcomed into decision-making processes. On the first anniversary of her revelation, Jasmine returned to the executive conference room where she had confronted Harrison Blackwood and transformed Sterling Financial forever. The space looked the same, but everything about its meaning had changed. Where once it had been a symbol of exclusion and discrimination, it had become a center of inclusive leadership and ethical business practices. She thought about the maintenance worker identity she had assumed for 3 months, remembering the daily humiliations and casual dismissals that had revealed so much about Sterling Financial's true character. The experience had changed her understanding of corporate leadership, showing her that real power came not from commanding respect, but from earning it through consistent demonstration of integrity and courage. A knock on the conference room door interrupted her reflections. Kenya Davis entered, carrying a stack of financial reports that showed Sterling Financial's continued growth and success under its transformed leadership structure. "The quarterly results are in," Kenya announced with a smile. "We've exceeded performance targets for the 4th consecutive quarter, and our employee satisfaction scores are the highest in the industry." Jasmine reviewed the numbers with satisfaction, but her attention was drawn to a different metric. Sterling Financial now employed more women and minorities in leadership positions than any other major financial services firm, while simultaneously achieving record profits and client satisfaction. "The amazing thing," Kenya continued, "is how simple it was once we stopped fighting against diversity and started leveraging it as a competitive advantage. Turns out that including talented people regardless of their backgrounds is actually good for business." As the sun set over Lake Michigan, casting long shadows across the conference room, Jasmine reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The decision to infiltrate Sterling Financial as a maintenance worker had been risky and personally difficult, but it had produced changes that would benefit thousands of employees and serve as a model for ethical leadership throughout the corporate world. The cleaning lady had become a catalyst for transformation, proving that sometimes the most powerful interventions come from the most unexpected sources. In a world where discrimination often operated through institutional blindness and willful ignorance, Jasmine had chosen to see everything, and in seeing, she had found the power to change everything. The reckoning was complete, but the work of building a more just and inclusive business environment was just beginning. Sterling Financial had become proof that companies could be both profitable and principled, successful and ethical, competitive and compassionate. The invisible observer had stepped permanently into the light, and the financial services industry would never be the same. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.